want to open up the conversation with Iran, a very, very, very important, I cannot stress enough, event in our recent current history, and something that, especially for women, is really important.
Is it Iran or Iran in English?
Iran, let's say.
I actually have no idea.
It's in
Please tell us how to pronounce
in
it.
Farsi is Iran. I don't know.
So to give you the context of why we're speaking about Iran, 41 days ago, I think, protests started to erupt across the country. And that's because the morality police, which is a police force in charge of enforcing what they consider to be Sharia law, killed a woman for not wearing properly her headscarf. So she died while in police custody after being arrested for not wearing properly her headscarf. And this created enormous protests. So for the last 40 days, you've had thousands of people on the streets all over the country. I remember in the first few days, I talked about it with my parents, who were like, well, this is going to die out so fast, like in Iran. Yeah. You have a bit of a spark, and then they managed to crack down. But actually, it spread to the entire country, and it's in itself a revolution. You have schoolgirls, women and men, some men, all over the country chanting for woman, freedom, life. Yeah. You have women cutting their hair in a sign of protest. And we wanted to talk about it because yesterday you had a day of mourning. Basically, you had protesters coming out and going to the grave of the young woman who was killed by the morality police. And the police fired at the crowd and killed people and launched tear gas. And it didn't deter protesters. Protesters are going out by the thousands again and again and again. But I think it was something to bring about, not only just for Iran and to talk about, the incredible bravery of people who know that they will literally be targeted after this, but who are fighting for their basic rights of choosing what to wear and what to wear. But also because, and then I want to hear your take on this, on that, because we always talk. Let me rephrase this. As I mentioned, I'm French, and in France I think France is a very Islamophobic country. And for example, we crack down on the right of women to wear a burqa, to wear a headscarf, or to wear anything else. And we don't talk about this, right? It's like we talk about the fact that Islam is trying to hurt our society and so on, instead of just, women should have the right to wear a headscarf or not to wear a headscarf. It's their basic right to decide what to do. And we don't celebrate just as much protesters, even though it's a free country, theoretically, in which it's not dangerous to protest. But we don't link those different struggles together. The struggle of a woman to have ownership over her body, to wear whatever she wants to wear on a given day, and the need to support those across the world, whether it's in Iran, where women should be able to cut their hair, let it out, or not, or in France, where women need to be able to wear a headscarf if they want to wear a headscarf.
Or in the US, where now abortion is under threat. So, yeah, many struggles are actually common and across borders. Common meaning like shared between people. So my point of view in all of this is very simple. Like, of course, for me, Iran is another criminal state. Sadly, they are managed to grip upon power since now, 40 years or so. So clearly, they are not going away anytime soon. They are playing a lot on, obviously, religious topics, and they are trying to capture religious fanatics. They did so successfully. So it's a sad situation. It's going to take a long time to, if I may say, liberate Iran from fanatics. I know that Iranian people are very resilient. I know the Iranian people are very strong. You have networks of Iranians fighting for freedom across the planet. You have Iranians defying the regime every day at home. But let's say I'm very, very motivated and inspired by the protests that are ongoing right now, because I think the only way to change a regime is actually from people from outside to stand up, and people from outside like us.
From inside, you mean?
People from inside to stand up and stand against dictatorship, while people from outside, like all of us, should support and be extremely supportive of the struggle. And here is where I think, sadly enough, as many times, we are all failing. And it's very difficult to see how we could do better. But in practice, let's think about it. Now, Iranian women are standing up for their freedom. A few governments express their sympathy, a few parliaments express their sympathy. But in practice, did anything change? Did we sanction more heavily Iran? Did we try to send aid to these women? Did we try to negotiate with Iran, for example, to remove some sanction in exchange of freedom to women? I did not see any government taking any meaningful action in that sense. And I know it's more complicated that it cannot happen like as a post on social media, but it's just like a story that you see a lot. It's like in Hong Kong, it's like in other places. There are massive protests, people do incredibly act of bravery. The public is aware and supports them, but then most time these things die out. Why? Because people in the country are suffering a lot and they cannot do everything on their own. And people outside forget, and governments do not take action. So I don't know what you think, Colombe, but I think here is where something has to change.
Yeah, what I love though is the show of solidarity, right? I think there's something to be said for solidarity across the world. Something we did at Atlas, and by the way, I see people sending us little hearts in the chat, which makes me very happy. So thank you for this.
I send you a heart back.
Something we did at Atlas is we organized protests, I think 100 weeks in a row, in support of freedom struggles in Hong Kong, Venezuela, Belarus, and so on, in front of government's building. And we did it not because we necessarily thought it was going to change something, but because we thought that it would be, it would show people. It started actually in support of Hong Kong, when Joshua Wong, who's an activist, was imprisoned. And we thought it would show people that, the world cared. And obviously this compared to, actual legislation or sanctions or whatever is little, but we received so many messages on social media, emails of people, etc., saying, look, seeing Europeans, Americans, South Americans, Africans, Asians, and so on going out to protest every Friday for weeks to show us that they care, moved us to tears. And I remember this, like, for me, it's probably the biggest success I've ever had in life, was like to bring together people to support others. Yeah. And you saw the emotional strength. Well, at least that's what people told us, right? Hong Kongers were telling us, this gives us such emotional strength. You guys are playing songs we're not allowed to play. You're displaying signs we're not allowed to display. And it gives us strength. And what I like to see is there's been so many massive protests in support of Iranian women across the world. You've seen, even though it's not enough and you need actions, but you've seen, members of the European Parliament cutting their hair on stage in support. You've seen so many people that are so far from, maybe a couple of months ago didn't even know what Iran was, or, the political situation, that are out on the streets and sending messages of support. And I think for what we're trying to do at Atlas, which is create a global consciousness, work together across borders, go beyond differences to stand a chance, it's incredibly powerful. It's the first step in creating a global consciousness and in uniting. It's to show support and to show that we won't just stand idle while governments are cracking down. Yeah. Then I agree, nothing is being done practically to support enough Iran. And I think this is due to a few things. Number one, when you have sanctions and embargoes and so on in place, it's extremely hard to be able to support humanitarian organizations or groups, etc., right? And then it's often difficult as well for certain organizations to receive support. So I actually don't know what the answer is to people following this. If you guys know, if you guys and gals, I need to stop saying guys, if you all know of organizations of ways of supporting Iranian women and protesters, if you have thought about it, if you live in a country where you needed support and didn't get it, and so on, let us know so that we can relay it. I think that's our strength. We have a network in so many countries. I would be super interested. I have no idea what is the best way of learning what's the best way of doing it.
Sorry, I'm going to do I didn't want to tap onto the story of us for our followers on other social media, it's our first Twitch, and I think it's very cool to see this way. But let's go back to our work. I fully agree with you. I think for me, there is no solution. So apart from being stronger in general on these topics and try to, comment back, ensure that there are more sanctions, ensure the governments do their job, ensure the governments are at the forefront of the fight for human rights and freedom across the planet, as some governments are doing more and some less. But I think that the solution is basically what we advocate for, or at least one of the solutions. So basically, if there was a body like the United Nations, they had the power to, I'm not saying military intervening countries, even if in the long term this would be it, but to at least severely sanction a country that is cracking down on fundamental freedom in in their country, among their people, that would be already a long way to stop this kind of situation. Like, if basically across the planet we could agree that women or any other group have the right or are entitled to wear whatever they want, to behave as they want, and to be whoever they wish to be, then this would be already a wonderful step forward for humankind, and probably a solution to many of these issues. What do you think, Colombe? While
No,
I close the story.
I completely agree. It's the long-term thing, right? The long-term solution for me is, again, working as one across the world and as people directly voting for what should be and what shouldn't be and so on. I really believe in this. However, in the meantime, there's the issue of how do you best support protesters in Iran, and this is when I'd like to hear from people. Woo! We've been speaking for 24 minutes.
And that's just the beginning. So I'm just finishing the story and I'll be with you.
I'm just reading the chat at the same time. I sent in the chat as well the news we're talking about so that you can also fact check them. Because I'm a fact nut. I hate it when people just talk about the news and you can't fact check it. So I think that's the first thing. So whoever's watching this, feel free to send us your tips. The second thing I wanted to talk about is drugs. So let me give you the context on why I'm interested in drugs since I selected, and not from a personal perspective, but
very interesting.
Not from a personal perspective, but because I've selected the news today to talk about, and I've selected Germany's plan to legalize recreational cannabis. So let me tell you why. I think drugs is a super interesting topic because I think it was in the 60s, whenever, or a bit later, when the US started a war on drugs. Suddenly attitude became super weird, right? Suddenly everything was criminal. People still in the US are incarcerated for decades at a time for possessing marijuana, which is insane. You can get longer sentences if you had 3 strikes for a marijuana offense than for some white collar crime, it's crazy. And across the world, we have this really weird view of drugs, as in like it's everything that's wrong with society. If you enable drugs, you're going to have gangs, and you're going to corrupt the youth, and you're going to, and the world is going to go to shit. Breaking news, we actually enable drugs. Alcohol is a drug, right? We just, because of cultural, I'm talking about European countries because I'm based in Europe. Because of cultural norms, we don't consider it to be a drug, but it's as addictive, if not way more addictive than most drugs. I drink, so I'm not saying it in a way of like you shouldn't drink. I'm just saying it's completely hypocritical.
Yeah.
Because we already allow drugs, cigarettes, alcohol, and a lot of other stuff. But on marijuana, cannabis, and cocaine,